All
Okay.
right.
Okay.
Please take it away, Mr. Mcgawe.
Okay, great. Thank you. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. For those of you I don't know, I'm Steve Mcgawe. I'm the Senior VP for Corporate Strategy and Development at the AT&T corporate level. I've been a longtime supporter of Ability, and before that, Ideal. Big advocate for people with diverse issues, whether it's neurodiversity issues or intellectual disabilities or physical disabilities. I have a son who has some learning challenges, some intellectual disabilities that we've grappled with for years and years, and so I have a real passion for people who have additional obstacles in their lives, including neurodiversity issues. And so when I was asked to moderate this panel, I immediately said, I'm in, because the people that you're going to hear from today, this will be a real treat, have a lot of personal experience in this space. And I think you'll learn a lot and maybe be able to apply some of these learnings to your own lives and to people that you care for and work with. Three panel members, Jennifer McCafferty, she's a channel manager in AT&T Business Marketing. Second is Rachel Salinas, program manager in AT&T Business Marketing. And Laura Kane, third, a service representative with AT&T Digital Retail and Care. Everyone's experience is different. You're going to learn about that today. And they all have different stories. And so I'd like to get right into it. And by the way, we will have some time for questions. So be thinking about your questions, and so that when we get to that point in time, which will probably be in about 30 minutes, a little maybe give or take, you have some thoughts that you can kind of bring forward for us to discuss. So anyway, let me start with Jennifer. I understand the conversation that you had with the Ability National President is really what inspired the theme of this panel discussion, not being disabled enough. So Jennifer, why don't you fill us in a little bit about your journey?
Sure. So I'm going to talk a little bit about my son, who's close and dear to my heart. And actually, I have some pictures of him that we're going to put up. But I want to introduce you to my son, Braden. Braden was a little different when he was about 1. He lacked a little eye contact. His speech regressed, and his motor skills were a little weren't quite where they needed to be. So we immediately sought clinical help for Braden, which began in the Birth to 3 program. He received some speech and physical therapy about 2 to 3 times a week. Braden was often described as a handsome and charming child. He often smiled and laughed, but as he grew older, we often ran into tantrums about 20 to 30 times a day. So I immediately started documenting his skills, or what sometimes his lack of skills. Could he say the right number of words? Could he eat with a spoon? Was he talking? Was he walking in a timely manner? I noted his tantrums and whether he had preferences and looked for patterns, trying to gather as much data as I could. And really, I was looking for a diagnosis going online. But what I quickly determined was I needed a second opinion. So to get an early diagnosis of autism is extremely difficult. Physicians are reluctant to label a child too early, especially one that's very high functioning. So we took him to a number of physicians who specialize in diagnosing autism. However, after seeing 4 doctors, we received various outcomes. Many were no autism, we're not sure, behavior disorders, finally got a diagnosis of autism. This was important, as you see, because in order to get services, you need an autism diagnosis, and a wait-and-see approach was not going to help my son get the services he needed. We applied for autism services from different organizations to help Braden, but he did not meet the criteria. He did not require in-home care, which was required for their programs. Fortunately or unfortunately for Braden, he was not disabled enough. Anyone who knows me knows I'm never going to give up. So I ended up hiring a private behavior therapist to help me train on how to help our son. She taught me the value of language and how important the use of concrete nouns and how speaking in positive versus negative can go a long way, and above all else, that someone's perception of any given situation can be different or much different than yours. When Braden was about 6, we put him in an adaptive camp for special needs. I called them ahead of time and discussed Braden's needs and even provided them training. And when I brought Braden to camp, there were about 6 or 7 other campers that were much more restricted. In fact, they were all in wheelchairs, and most of them required feeding assistance. Although this wasn't a great fit for Braden, we didn't have a lot of other options, and he couldn't go to a non-adaptive daycare. Even though we tried to train the staff, Braden, with all of his 6-year-old energy and sensor, was way too much for this adaptive team, and he was asked to leave the camp. Evidently, he was not disabled enough. As Braden continued through school, I continued to work with the staff on the use of language. In middle school, he was disciplined for walking on the lunchroom bench. The staff told me he was told a number of times, don't walk on the tables. Children on the spectrum do not understand the language and require concrete positive language. So I asked the staff, what did you tell them to do? So they looked at me kind of funny, and I said, well, how many, you need to tell them what to do instead of telling them what not to do. How many times have you heard your children or heard in your schools stop running at your child's school? Well, what does that really mean? If you really think about it, this statement does not provide any useful direction at all. Using phrases like start walking is much clearer and provides a positive direction. Avoiding phrases like don't and providing positive descriptive expectations is a much better approach. Through much deliberation, Frisco ISD has now adapted this widespread initiative and incorporated this into their programming. And I continue to incorporate this into my day-to-day language, whether that be at work or with my children. When Braden was 13, we received a call from the school on how defiant Braden was being that day. He wouldn't do his work, he wouldn't eat lunch, and he wouldn't participate in any activities. It wasn't until the end of the day that they determined why. It was picture day, and Braden's schedule, he was scheduled for his picture at the last period of the day. Braden was so worried that he was going to get his shirt dirty or he was going to get messed up and take a bad picture that his entire day was ruined. Now, had a teacher only asked Braden, instead of making assumptions, they could have had his pic taken at the first period of the day, and he could have gone on about his day without all of the built-up anxiety. The teachers had already judged Braden on their perception of the situation, which had blinded them from a simple reality, which is a good life lesson for them and for all of us, is to not always assume we know or understand the intent of others. Ask questions, listen, and be ready to adjust. Braden is now 15. He's a freshman at Memorial High School. He's still mainstreaming classes, but he does have a case manager. He still struggles to fit in with the other kids, and he doesn't quite fit in with the other adaptive programs because he's not quite disabled enough, and we still struggle, but every day is a little bit better. So that's my story.
That's very good. I've heard you describe it as, Braden being between two worlds and, dealing with, frankly, teachers who may not be trained to be able to support and recognize the needs of special students who have special needs. So Maybe we'll circle back to that in a few minutes, but that's a powerful concept. Let's transition to Rachel. Rachel, you have a daughter who has did very well in high school and is now in college. Why don't you talk about that transition and how your daughter has and you have grappled with that?
Sure. Little similarities to Jennifer's story. So my daughter, Sierra, was diagnosed with ADD in elementary. And then by middle school, in her preteen, she was diagnosed with Asperger's syndrome. So similar to Jennifer, there's not a lot of early diagnosis in younger ages for autism or for Asperger's. And so at that time, it was really hard to cope with. I figured, I just kept thinking it's her ADD. There's really nothing else wrong with her. But then as a mom, you have to step back and say, okay, there's something else going on. And so as she got older, like I said, in her preteen, she was diagnosed with Asperger's. And so at the beginning, I went through this, probably the first 24 hours of, kind of like, this is the negative thing. This is gonna, what is she not gonna be able to do in life? And then, we had meetings with the school district, and the school district down in Corpus Christi, where we are from, pretty much, to me, tried to dictate her future. There was a lot of focus on what she wouldn't do, what she couldn't do. They pretty much told us that 11, 12 years old, that she's not going to go to college. We'll put her in a work program when she gets into high school. She'll learn some basic skills. She can probably live in a group home. But that's what they were telling us. And, after probably about a week or two after that meeting, we were telling my family, my husband and my parents, like, that's not Sierra. I'm with her 24 hours a day. I know what she can do. So I guess a little bit of the defensive mama came in, right? It's my kind of, no, I know she's maybe not, kind of a little bit opposite. Like, I know she can do things. I know she's high functioning. And so I know that she doesn't fit into this box. And that's one thing I learned, that there is no one size fits all when it comes to autism or autism spectrum disorder. I know what she can and cannot do. And I started to focus and change my approaches and with her is, let's focus on what you can do. And so, that's where we decided to go ahead and move her to a private school. It was a smaller setting. They couldn't do any accommodations like they would in a public school, but they did have the one accommodation they would be able to give her was extra time to complete work. And so that was perfect for her. That's really all she needed. She graduated at the AV honor roll. She did great. She loved school. She was so excited to go to college. So she enrolled in the community college there in Corpus Christi. And then reality set in. So school started, she went to her first class and she registered for, a full load. And so she walked into her class and it was very overwhelming because in high school, middle school, there's that structure. The bell rings, you go to class, you go to your locker, you get your books, you go to your next class, you're assigned where to sit, and we didn't think about that there's this structure. And one thing with most people who are on the spectrum is routine. They have to, routine is what they live by. When you change the routine, it can be very overwhelming, even just a small change. And so in college, it was very overwhelming. She walked into her first class and she was very overwhelmed. Didn't know where to sit, figured it would be like high school. She would be assigned where to sit. She asked the teacher and said, oh, pick wherever you want. That was overwhelming to her. Does she sit in the front? Do I sit in the middle? Do I sit in the back? She didn't know what to do. And so she finally, picked a seat. And the first week was very overwhelming. By the second week, she thought she could maybe make it through. She dropped one class, so she would just have 3 classes, and it just didn't get any better. She needed that routine. And so she dropped out that first semester. She was heartbroken because she was, really looking forward to it. And so fast forward about a year later, we moved up here to Dallas. and there was a lot more resources. We were really happy to find Tarrant County College. And so they have several campuses, but the campus that she goes to has a great program for people on the autism spectrum and neurodiversity, other conditions, intellectual disabilities. And so it was a really great program that she's been in. She completed several kind of prerequisite courses, Autism 1, Autism 2, and I believe it's Autism 3. And then she did some life skills, some courses to help her how to make life decisions, like kind of more of an adulting type course, because for us and for most, kids making that transition, these little decisions are easy for us, but for someone on the spectrum, it can be very overwhelming. So, she has taken a different pathway. She's taking regular courses now. She was in that program for a couple of years at Tarrant County. And so now she's enrolled in, I guess what we call mainstream in high school, but just regular courses. She does have support through the student accessibility program there or department. And so her professors know of her disability. She's learned to be very upfront and advocate for herself and let people know that she is on the spectrum or that she's autistic. She just likes to tell people, I have autism. And I know that's pretty much up to the individual on how they would like to identify as either autistic or ASPE for Asperger's syndrome, or, but that's what she likes. She'll just tell people up front, I have autism. And so I may need you to clarify some things for me. I may ask more questions than some others. But she's really learned how to advocate for herself. I'm really proud of her. But pretty much that's our story where we're at right now. She's working towards getting her degree, and I know she's going to get there.
That is a great story. Our son who did graduate from college went to 3 different colleges before we found the right one for him. And, it helps to call it early, make the decision early in the process, before, too many years go by and find that right match. And, it's painful, but back to your point about no one size fits all, I think that really resonates with me. So thanks, Rachel. We'll come back to you in a few minutes. Let me now move over to Laura. Laura, you were unusual in the fact that you were diagnosed later in life. Tell us about your experience. Tell us about, what it was like going through school and college for you, piggybacking on what Rachel was just saying, and then, how you figured this out and what you're doing about it.
Thank you, Stephen. I'd be delighted to. My grandmother wrote in her autobiography, Laura was a very odd child. She has a ton of grandkids and a ton of great-grandkids, and she'd never met a kid who only wanted friends that were adults. I tended to do solitary activities by myself, like pick up pecans in her yard or help around the house as my cousins were outside playing in the sprinkler or just playing. Autism in girls presents differently than it does in boys, as Rachel mentioned with her daughter. In my baby book, my mom recorded that I rarely responded to my name. I didn't want to be touched or wear certain clothes. And by the time I was 6, it was noted that I had difficulty following simple direction and recognizing social cues, and I had inappropriate social interactions. And I was extremely fascinated with anything that spun or had circular movement. So I was particularly fascinated by technical things. My father raised me because my mom moved away after I turned 9. Before she moved, she was always on my case because I was just incorrigible. I couldn't sit still. I constantly rotated my wrist to hear them pop every 15 seconds. It drove everyone crazy. Like Braden's story, I was reprimanded at school for doing things that I didn't even know were wrong. For instance, once we were walking back to our class and we'd taken our milk cartons and emptied them out. We were in a line walk into class so that we could plant a pinto bean into each carton. It was raining, and I put my hand out with the milk carton to fill it up with rain that poured off the roof, and then I dumped it out in the grass. And like Jennifer mentioned, no one told me this was bad or it wasn't allowed. They just pulled me into the office and paddled me. Thank God corporal punishment is a thing of the past. But I seriously had no idea why. Why didn't they tell me what to do versus punishment for something I didn't know was wrong? Now, my dad, he was much less rigid with me than my mom was, and more or less allowed me to be myself and stay awkward. He didn't know what to say when I was sad that I'd come home and I didn't have any friends at school, and his advice was, you need to smile more. Your face just looks depressed all the time. You don't smile. So he kind of thought I looked unapproachable, and he tried his best to give me the advice that he thought he could. I couldn't understand other children. They couldn't really understand me when we played or talked. It was like we spoke different languages. I even walked to the local library to see if I could find a book on how to have conversations with people, and I couldn't find anything, so I'd go home and read my children's encyclopedias over and over. I did get good grades in school. Each teacher seemed to be a friend to me. I don't know if they felt sorry for me because I seemed to be rejected by the other children, or if they genuinely liked me, or just both. So grade school went by okay. I just didn't have friends. Middle school was a little different. Once I hit puberty, I had questions, but no maternal figure in my life to actually answer them. So I would ask questions to the other girls in my classes about stuff like, how do I figure out what bra size I need? And evidently this is not an appropriate topic to talk about in school. So I was horribly bullied after that. My grades seemed to stay up, even though I was depressed and down. And if I kept quiet enough and kept to myself, people really left me alone. I just couldn't seem to communicate. I believe around 7th grade, I realized that it was really face-to-face communication that I had trouble with. The lack of affect in my face made people uncomfortable, as I mentioned earlier. I learned to mimic others' expressions, animated my face more often, even though it was fake, and it seemed to help a bit with conversations. While I can't read or couldn't read facial expressions or body language, I could at least pick up the tone of voice to figure out what the speaker's emotions or feelings were about the way the conversation was going. I did whiz through academics until my senior year of high school. At that point, I was having to stare down the barrel of college, and I didn't know what I wanted to do. I had major depressive disorder, and I couldn't give my high school counselor any idea of what I wanted to do after high school. I can't even remember if it was depression or just a lack of interest. So like Rachel's daughter, I started community college, and I was flustered. I didn't know where to sit. There weren't bells that rung to signal class was over, and it just was, I flailed. Ended up failing algebra 3 times. I probably would have a 4th time if a conversation with my uncle saying, women can't be police officers, led me to prove him wrong. This was actually what I needed. The routine and structure of police academy was college-led. Everybody wore uniforms. We all went to the same courses. We all had to pass together, and it was exactly what I needed. I was able to finish my 2-year degree, graduated. I really wasn't cut out for police work, not because I couldn't do the job, but because I couldn't handle the politics of the intra-departmental conflicts. Here, you got to pick a side. Do you want to do this, or you want to go this way? Whose style do you want to measure? Whose style do you want to, oh gosh, I can't think of the word. Anyhow, the politics were not much for me. So I landed a job with Southwestern Bell as a service rep, and I loved the work right away. That early training of picking up the tone of voice helped me communicate with the customer. I could pick up their anger, frustration, their joy, their excitement, and it led me to really relate to customers who would call in. It was scripted, so that helped. I didn't have to worry about anybody seeing my face or me seeing theirs except on break. and it was perfect. I did seek out a counselor, and I went through 10 or 11 counselors over a 10-year period. I just was trying to figure out how to socialize more effectively. After relationships with coworkers tended to end up rocky, or they just ended and I'd be ghosted, I kept hoping for some kind of help to talk with others, but all the counselors said I could communicate with them just fine, and there's nothing wrong with you. I don't understand why you're here. So as far as seeking out a test, I met my best friend in roller derby when I joined roller derby, and she was autistic herself, and she said that she thought I had autism based on her own experiences. So I did ask some of the counselors, hey, can you look at me from an autistic lens? And time after time, they just said, you're not autistic. You can hold a conversation with me and get through a session with them. So you're just not autistic enough. You're fine. So finally, my spouse stepped in and got me in to see a psychiatrist and refused to take no for an answer, and said, hey, you're getting tested. I got sent for testing, and neuropsychological testing did come back that I had Asperger's, just like Rachel's daughter. Now, I was 38 years old, and everybody was like, why do you care? You're not going to get anything out of the diagnosis. You're not going to get any services or anything like that. But for me, looking back on my life through a lens of someone with a diagnosis and knowing that I had a neurodevelopmental disorder, all of a sudden my whole life made sense. All those years of struggling and suffering and just learning that my problem with communication was not my fault was a huge relief to me. I wasn't sabotaging friendships on purpose. I just didn't know how to communicate. So that's my story, and that's how school went. And Braden's story and Rachel's story really resonate with me because I went through the same things. So
thank you. Well, I have to say you're the first person I've gotten to know that had a life-altering experience through roller derby. So that is really, it says a lot about you, Laura, that you can take that on. So there's a lot packed in all of these stories. And before I continue asking questions, let me kind of open it up and ask if there are other people who have a question that they'd like to pose. Otherwise, I'll keep going.
Actually, there are a few questions out there in the chat. One of them is directed directly towards Rachel. She mentioned about relocating to Dallas. Before relocating, how did you find information to support your daughter? Are there any specific resources or website links that you can send over and drop into the chat for review out here in the Dallas Fort Worth area?
I think you're muted.
Yep. That mute button gets me every time. Sorry. Okay. Okay. So before we moved into the Dallas area, there were not a lot of resources where we were living in at the time, which is Corpus Christi. So I'd be happy to share resources that I came across here in the North Texas area, if that's, I think, was what the question is. So there is a group that we went to get tested, and Jennifer may have another group also, but I can send that over. This is more specific to the Fort Worth, South Arlington area, but I'm sure there's other groups. They, did some updated testing so that we can get her some help through Texas Workforce to help her with job assisting and job training. That came through Easter Seals, which is a great organization. She's got a job coach that helps her. She did have a part-time job for a little bit at Home Goods. It was a little overwhelming for her because she also has arthritis. And so she had a couple of flare-ups. But as far as resources, Tarrant County College, you can Google them. They do have a great program. There are, of course, other autism groups. We've never I really didn't find the resources, and I don't want to talk badly about any group or one specific organization, but some of the organizations out there, to Jennifer's point, are more for what they have a criteria where you have to be a certain level of disabled to get their benefits. And so I didn't have to get, Sierra really didn't need some of the resources from Autism Speaks and some of the other groups out there. But the main thing is to finding somewhere where you can get testing so that you can get the diagnosis. It helps in various parts of your life, like with Laura's situation, validation as to what, going on with Jennifer's son and my daughter. It helps with school, with being able to have those resources within school. So it just really depends on what level you're at, but I'd be happy to drop some in the chat or email them to Bree, and Bree can send them out, I guess, to everyone after this call. I can more than happy to share some of those resources.
I would also guess that, Crystal, I don't want to speak for Ability, but I would think Ability could also act as a resource to people, depending on where you live. There are different chapters in different cities, and maybe we can help through Ability. Crystal, I don't know if you want to chime in on that.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We've been looking at trying to do that efficiently for a few months now. So absolutely, that's in the works. I have a question that I think probably is best directed at Laura. As a person with autism, has the pandemic or, our virtual work situation now, has that affected you in any way for the good or for the bad?
Thanks for that question. Actually, the work from home option has eliminated almost all of my stress during the workday. I don't have to pretend or mask, which is where you try to hide who you are, try and fit in. So not having to mask at all for any part of the day is very freeing. I'm able to communicate via text and email, and if my calls with management are scheduled in advance, I really do great. Any unplanned calls I do my best with, but if I have trouble, I might have a meltdown. But I do feel comfortable asking my manager, asking my admin to repeat themselves or try to rephrase something if I can't grasp or understand it. But as far as the pandemic and things are concerned, I was at the dentist in October, and I realized that the stress level had decreased because for the first time in over 30 years, my dentist said, hey, you're no longer grinding your teeth at night. So it really has lifted a lot of stress.
Very good. Very good answer. One of the things that strikes me is how important advocacy is, whether it's for yourself or for your child or some other loved one, how critical that is. And maybe you can each talk a little bit about that, whether it's at work or, again, trying to find proper accommodations, because I've heard multiple times on this call how important the testing is, and frankly, people saying, they're not disabled enough, and therefore, there's really nothing that can be done. Maybe start with you, Jennifer. You talk about that a little bit.
Sure. So, and I'm sorry, I was just reading one of the questions, Steve.
About advocacy and how important advocacy is for your child or for yourself, depending on who has the disability, and how important those that advocacy is, making sure that your loved one gets the proper attention.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's a huge, piece of it. So I'm constantly in touch with my son's caseworker daily, if not multiple times a day. just touching base with his teachers, just making sure that they have tools, and always trying to give them resources as well. Like I said, this communication, and I see it in the chat. Communication is such a big piece of, especially with autism, setting expectations, talking in concrete, and being very clear in spoken word. So just trying to make sure that they're using that in every day and giving them the tools. And so being an advocate for my son is huge. So whatever they need, I always try to make sure that I'm giving that to them and offering whatever they, I can do to help, whether that be reinforcing, and that's one of the things that just came up in the chat, is reinforcing whatever they need at home. So if, it's a teamwork, right? So as the children making sure getting homework done, because a lot of times it's avoidance. So working as a team, making sure that they're telling me, I'm following up at home, they're following up at school, and that communication is being passed back and forth. So.
Very good.
Yep.
Anyone else, Rachel or Laura, want to comment on that?
Yes, this is Laura. I really, really think advocacy is very important. And, I didn't have much when I was a kid because I didn't know anything was wrong. But as of today, I believe that advocacy for yourself is very important. And if your children see you advocating for them, perhaps when they're an adult and they're trying to get through the day, that they may join some groups like asan.org, which is an autism self-advocacy network, and it's telling people, like, this is Autism Awareness Month, and the connotation for the word aware is bad, danger, no. So they're trying to move April to be Autism Acceptance Month, and advocating for yourself and advocating for others really does tell the person that they're accepted, and that's really important.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. We found with our own son how important it is, for him to, because we won't be with him at every moment, in college and with jobs, advocating for himself, sometimes being a little bit pushy to get that extra accommodation and get people to realize, you're not trying to wear the issue on your sleeve, but at the same time, it's a competitive world out there. And frankly, if what we found is if he doesn't learn that skill, he can be bullied quite a bit. And I think this is several of you have mentioned that, bullying and being mistreated and so forth, which then leads to, self-esteem challenges and ultimately leads to, potentially depression. So anyway, those are some points from at least my seat. Rachel, anything else to add on that?
Oh, I advocate for Sierra all day, and she has learned to advocate for herself. Sierra is she still lives with us, and I'm going to probably be the one hardest to cut that cord. But I know she will eventually be able to be on her own. But, we live in a crazy world, and I'm just that overprotective mom too, because she is, when people see Sierra or they meet her for the first time, I've often gotten like, oh, that she doesn't look autistic, I'm like, well, what is autism supposed to look like, and so I'm going to share a picture, if you don't mind, of my daughter really quick. I'm just, that proud mama. I just want to share with everyone. But she, people will say that, what is that, oh, she doesn't look autistic. And so, I advocate for her, all the time, but I want her to advocate for herself, and she's gotten really good at it. She is, and I don't know if y'all can see this or not, but
It's coming up.
Okay. So there's my Sierra when you can see it.
There it is.
Okay. So, one thing that I was thinking about was we were talking, like listening to Laura also is that, she is high functioning. She is great, amazing. She's optimistic. She's like the sunshine of our house, right? Even through COVID, she's been so positive and so, she's really okay with being home, kind of, because she kind of likes being by herself. But, Sierra can do a lot. And so, but, socially, she's probably around 13, 14 years old, although she's in her 20s, And so when people meet her, again, like I said, the first time they may not think she's autistic. And then once you start talking to her, you can see how she has a little hard time, focusing and making that eye contact. But she still definitely, has a little bit of not stuttering, but a little bit trying to say the right thing. She's always afraid she's going to say the wrong thing, but she, just encouragement, letting her have some of these experiences on her own. Like, she wants to check on something. I'm no longer going to call the bank for her. I'm no longer going to make doctor's appointments for her. I let her do those things, and I'm standing right there by her side, trying to help her. And so that's just part of the little things that most of our kids that are 16, 17, 18, 19 years old could probably do on their own now, but she still needs that guidance. In her early 20s, she still needs that help. So just advocate and be patient, and just know you're not alone. Anyone who may be on the spectrum or a parent of somebody on the spectrum, you're not alone. And Ability has some great support. I'm an active member with Ability when it comes to autism. Crystal Bree can call me up and I'll be here. If anyone has any questions, you can always reach out to me. But just know you're not alone. And there are resources, and things have definitely gotten better over the last 10 years, I'd say, as far as resources and being, accepting. And I'm totally with Laura. We definitely want to change from autism awareness or, that's great, but let's go to acceptance, because neurodiversity is not a bad thing. Shouldn't be a bad thing.
Yeah, well said. Brittany, what other questions do we have?
Awesome. Well, we have one more from the chat, and this question is actually positioned to mainly Rachel and Jennifer. What are some best practices that you can recommend in directing parents that have children that are on the spectrum through their needs, and just helping them to be more engaged and just to kind of embrace that reliability facet? Because I know that you guys talked about kind of staying on task and kind of helping nurture them along the way. But what are some of those best practices that you guys have seen that that you can possibly share that may help some parents out here that are actually going through the same things that you guys have gone through?
And we talked a little bit about that when Steve was talking about advocating. So I walk the fine line. So you want to be an advocate, but you want to make sure that they do that, and you want to give them a little bit so that they're advocating for themselves, like Rachel said as well. So, it's a constant, check. I give him as much room as I can. In school, he has, his work isn't, we've modified his work. So his workload is much smaller. So that's one of the things in his IEP. So he has to demonstrate, for example, math. He's very good at math, but having him do 20 problems of the same math thing over and over again isn't helpful to him. If he can demonstrate that he knows how to do it, we're all good. He can move on. So, for example, we may require him to do 2. Good. We're all good. We check the box and we move on. So those are kind of things that I work with the teachers on, making sure that we are smart in what we have him do and focus on. So where he needs help, we focus in on that. And where he can show he can check the box, let's do it and move on. But I just make sure I'm in constant communication. I think that's the biggest thing, is making sure that you're in constant communication with his teachers, and so that you're checking with them, making sure that he's doing what he needs to do, and so that I can follow through with him at home.
Jennifer, what about, has he ever resented the help? Has that ever been an issue? Or for Rachel as well, but have they ever resented the help?
So here's a good story. There's a class last year that one of his teachers told him that they wanted him to focus on one of his classes that he really needed in order to graduate. And one of them he really didn't need, and they told him that. And so he just stopped doing work altogether. He decided he didn't need the class, so why should he do the work? And I was like, oh boy. So we learned a valuable lesson that year. So that was one of them that, we don't ever tell him that this doesn't count. So one of his teachers did that, but yeah. So things like that have happened. He has decided he won't do it, and we don't push him. You can't, if he's not going to do it, he's not going to do it. He's almost an adult now, and he's got to make those decisions, but there's ramifications. He didn't do his work in one of his courses. He will have to take that course over, and now he realizes what has to happen. So sometimes, they have to realize the ramifications as well. So that's life.
All right, and just real quickly, Jennifer, I have a follow-up question too now. Someone in the chat is asking, is your child on medication? And if so, does he still require less work when he's on medication? Their 13-year-old son has been struggling for quite some time now.
He is on medication. He, like I said, the work isn't dependent upon the medication. The work is just dependent on what he, what he knows and what he doesn't know. So I work with his school on where he needs to focus, and what I know he knows and what he knows well, we pull back on that. And also what is important to get him to graduate and go on to college. So, we focus in on the primary areas.
Hey, Wizard, I am here. This is Ambika, but mainly we need Tarun Jira to answer this question.
I'm sorry?
Apologize for that. I don't think they intended to be heard. I apologize.
Oh, okay. Okay. I hope I answered that question.
I think you did.
Okay, great.
Brittany, what else?
I know that Crystal, you saw some questions coming down your pipeline as well.
Yes, I did. So Rachel, I think this one, oh shoot, let me scroll back up in the chat. I think this one is for you. Have y'all ever considered doing a conservatorship with your daughter? Has that ever come into the mix or conversations surrounding conservatorships?
We talked about it at one time, and it's probably something we could look back at again, but I'm not going to be here forever, right? And so I'm working on her being more self-sufficient. We've gotten to, she does have, I want to circle back a little bit about resources because I forgot to mention this. She has got some assistance through Social Security just so that she can at least get Medicare because, eventually she's going to time out on my insurance. And so she has that as a secondary, and then it'll become her primary once she's not able to be, she hits that age, or she can't be on mine. Another resource that I didn't mention, and it's called Open Gate. I will send the information to Bree. That's been really, really helpful. She's in a group therapy, and she meets once a week with other young adults that are on the spectrum or Asperger's, and it's been very, very helpful. she's really thriving with that, and she gets advice from them and help from them. So sometimes I think, you know, kind of like the question that was asked to Jennifer, do they resent the help? Yeah, sometimes I think she would just get tired of having help from mom, you know, and from family members. So it's good to have that help from a therapist and from a group therapy setting, others that are on the spectrum like her. So that's what I wanted to put in about resources. I'll send that info. But, you know, that is something that we probably need to look at as a conservatorship. But right now we don't have that for her. Jennifer, I don't know if you've thought about that for your son yet, or
we haven't gotten that far yet.
Yeah, yeah.
Still trying to get
through
high
I should
school.
probably look at. Yeah, right.
Yeah, I think you're right. That is always the concern. I mean, we've talked a lot about school and going from high school to college, going from college to the workforce is yet another step. And then, you know, potentially families, right? Having families and all the responsibility that comes with that. So it is sort of a lifelong journey, is the truth. And I think I think this has been really, really informative. I don't want to cut the questions off. I definitely want to ask one kind of closing question, unless Crystal or Brittany have one last question before we kind of go into the final.
No, you can go ahead and give us your closing thoughts.
Okay. Well, my main question really is exactly that. What would each of you, you know, like to leave the viewers / listeners of this call with in terms of resources or a word of advice? What would you suggest? And so maybe we'll start with you, Jennifer, and then we'll go to Rachel and then Laura.
I guess my word of advice to anyone with children on the spectrum is be patient, listen, and just, you know, the more you can focus in on your language and using concrete language, talking positive, and avoid assumptions. That's what I have really, truly learned. And not only with children on the spectrum, it's helped me at work. So if you don't pick that up from children, it's a great thing to use every day. So that's what I would walk away with.
Very good. Rachel?
Just echoing what Jennifer said, have patience. Know that you're not alone. I think I've mentioned that before. You know, there are resources. Definitely reach out to Ability, to other resources. You can hit me up. I'll send you what resources I have. But also focus on what your child can do and not what they can't do. And, you know, I think that's powerful for them also. Using that language like Jennifer talked about, you know, instead of don't do this, this is what you can do. You know, it's like I've gone over with Sarah before, like, you know, when she hits a roadblock or she gets a little discouraged on something, you know, just like, you know, you can do this, but you're going to have to take a different path. It's going to be a little different than others. I think that's the main thing I would say is just to focus on the positive. It's a little hard as a parent sometimes, you know, you want to make sure that your child thrives and that you're doing everything you can. And so that's my advice, is to focus on the positive.
Very good. Very good. And Laura?
Mm-hmm.
Did we lose Laura? I don't hear or see Laura in
Sorry,
here.
I couldn't find them. I couldn't go all the way back to the top to find my mute button.
Okay.
I think the same as Jennifer and Rachel said. Please stay positive and avoid assumptions. And as for advice, just listen and be open to boundaries and accommodations instead of asking, do you really need this? Or this only takes me 2 hours to do. Why does it take you 3? Or the dreaded, you know, you don't seem or look autistic. Respect autistic individuals and instead ask, hey, how can I better support you? Or, hey, I'm glad you told me. Let me know if you need any help for me to communicate better for you, better to you. Just stay positive, and like Braden's story, start walking. Don't tell people to stop doing something. Tell them what you need them to do. That's super important to me.
Well, that's great advice from all three of you. There's 50 million people in the U.S. that have some form of disability and or some challenge that is significant like this, and so we all travel in circles where there are people who either have issues themselves or are closely associated with people who are challenged in these ways. So be sensitive to it. Keep learning. I mean, you've taken a big step today just by participating in this. I really want to thank Jennifer and Rachel and Laura for opening up and sharing their personal stories. I want to thank Brittany for managing the technology and doing such a great job of, keeping us on track and making this all work. And for Crystal for sponsoring it and hosting it, and for including me in it. So thanks to everybody. I hope you have a great rest of the week, and plug into ability. Ask your questions, lean in and participate, and help. You can help a lot of other people too while helping yourself. So with that, I think we'll sign off unless, Crystal, you had anything else you wanted to say.
No, just a general thank you for joining us today. Thank you so much, Steve, for helping moderate for us. That was amazing to have you here with us. And, like Steve said, please have a wonderful day ahead of you. Thank you, guys.
We'll see you all. Bye-bye.
Thank you.